Thank you for joining the second session of the Global Security Speaker Series with Mr. Yuichiro Kakutani. Mr. Kakutani is the policy advisor for China and the Indo-Pacific at the Heritage Foundation. He previously served on Senator Johnny Ernest's national security team and reported on China's influence operations for the Washington Free Beacon and the Daily Beast. He holds a BA in Government and History from Cornell University and an MA in Asian Studies from Georgetown University. Today, Mr. Kakutani will be speaking to us about techno-industrial policy and the Indo-Pacific military balance. So thank you, Mr. Kakutani, for joining us.
Yeah,
Before, yeah, before we begin, could you briefly outline the main areas of research you focus on at the Heritage Foundation beyond the topic we have today, which is techno-industrial policy and the
yeah,
Indo-Pacific military balance?
yeah. No, I mean, I think that mostly covers it. I do U.S.-China competition specific. So I'm not necessarily study China in of itself, but more the dynamic aspects of the competition, specifically what like tech, econ, and foreign aligned influence, I would say, and some defense approaches. I would say that's kind of the aspects and that I cover, especially in trying to make recommendations to policymakers on what America and government should do to win the competition in those spaces.
Yep, thank you for that. I think that is a good summary of your work at the Heritage Foundation. Starting with industrial policy, we've seen several new government measures aimed at shaping key industries over the past few months. What is Washington trying to achieve with steps like the CHIPS Act or expanded export controls and the new rules that screen U.S. investments overseas?
So is the question specifically about export controls and foreign like investment
Uh,
screenings?
it's just overall what's Washington trying to achieve with these steps that they've taken over the past few months.
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that they're aiming to make sure China doesn't get access to key dual-use technologies that's going to fuel their military as well as their technology sectors. So that the United States can stay ahead of the curve in terms of really critical technology areas. I think the focus of conversation in DC right now is artificial intelligence. So hence chip controls is a very hot topic in DC in terms of what the right approach to controlling the export of U.S. chips, U.S. produced, U.S. derived chips should be. That's an ongoing conversation that is happening in DC. But again, ultimately, the objective is to stall China's technological means, both and that's an objective that's important in of itself, and also because those Chinese technological um, gains translate directly to military capabilities.
Thank you. That was a helpful big picture view. Drilling it down a bit, even with tougher US sanctions, Chinese firms such as DeepSeek and Quen are still launching new AI breakthroughs. What does this indicate about the real limits of Western tech restrictions and China's ability to develop its own solutions?
Well, I think there's a lot of very smart scientists in China, clearly, and smart engineers. Many of them trained in American institutions, right? So we're never the. I think we have to be careful in terms of setting the success mark for export controls. The Chinese are going to continue to make technological breakthroughs. I think the estimates on how far ahead the U.S. frontier models are compared to China, it varies, but 3 to 6 months is some people's estimates. Even the most generous estimates, I would say, is like 12 months, right? So a lot of the milestones we're hitting, China will, which means that milestones we hit, we can presume that will probably hit them at least in the short to medium term, in soon after. That said, I think there's two things. One is the DeepSeek moment was definitely quite amazing, but the DeepSeek was very effective because it had a very efficient algorithm, right? Much more efficient than some frontier models developed in the United States. So they used a more efficient algorithm to compensate for the fact that they didn't have as much high-end chips as they wanted. But I think there's the bitter truth, as it's called in the tech space, is that it really is scaling is what matters, right? So what kind of incremental gains you might make in algorithmic efficiencies or other measures will ultimately not matter, and it'll be outscaled by the immense gains you make by just having more chips, empowering more chips, right? It's just quantity of chips is the deciding factor in the long run, and algorithmic efficiency only gets you so far. So I think that's really the key aspect, right? So deep seek moments could happen, but ultimately it would have been a lot worse if the Chinese had access to a lot more chips. And the other aspect is, these chip controls. It's only been relatively recent, right? 2 or 3 years that we really started to block exports of H100s. We briefly had blocks on H20 chips. That block has been lifted. So during that time, China had the ability to stockpile a lot of hundreds of thousands of these sort of chips they're going through that stockpile right now, right? So it's a bit too early to assess whether the efficacy of export controls. What's really going to start to happen if export control is as effective as we believe it will be. And once the Chinese start running out of stockpiles of their chips and they really don't have enough chips to continue to build, that's when Chinese AI development, maybe in the next few years, will start to fall off, and the lag time would increase with U.S. frontier models. So that's the hope, at least. So of course, DeepSeek moment is important, but I won't over-index that an indictment against the efficacy of U.S. export controls.
Thank you. That was a very interesting insight. On a related note, from your investigative work on US universities and Chinese tech partnerships, what loopholes in America's research security ecosystem still let Beijing tap into federally funded research and development despite tighter export control?
Well, I think this is like almost a different category of issue from export controls, right? Export controls are mostly directed at corporations, right, and commercialized technologies, right, as well as commercialized technologies with military applications, right. So a lot of what's happening in academia is what they understand to be fundamental research, right. So that's basic research rather than applied research, and that's research that a lot of academics would make the claim that, like, look, we're just researching for the sake of research, and this is not something that we're just academics and researchers trying to advance the total sum of human knowledge, right? Which is different from like a different adjacent but different set of issues from export controls and specific proven commercial technologies. And it's always been a bit of a tough fight because, of course, we don't want to restrict academic freedom. Academics should have the freedom to research and to engage, but at the same time, these American researchers receive taxpayer funded research. Oftentimes, taxpayer funded research grants from the Department of Defense for the explicit purpose of supporting our national security enterprise. So I tend to think that tends to come with some extra responsibilities as a researchers to make sure that your fundamental research, your basic research, does not fall into the similar to end up supporting China's civil military fusion strategy. But obviously that's a bit of a harder issue set to control for than export controls. So I think that's why there's still a bit of a lag in terms of tools of enforcement about these sort of things, because there still is a lobby in academia that calls for engagement with China.
Thank you. That was a very interesting insight. Um, Shifting to supply chain vulnerabilities, gallium, germanium, and a dozen other specialty metals now sit behind new Chinese export controls. How vulnerable are U.S. compound semiconductor and defense supply chains, and what alternatives can the U.S. have in these matters?
I mean, we're very vulnerable. The Chinese threatened, Chinese posed export controls on critical minerals, and then soon our automobile manufacturers were saying within 2-3 months of those controls coming into place that their factories are going to start shutting down in Michigan, right? This had a very, and of course a lot of these critical minerals are very directly used for the assembly of U.S. military hardware, right? So I mean, we're very vulnerable, and the fact that the Chinese were able to really use that as leverage to threaten to shut down major economic industrial hubs in the United States, I think it's a sort of Damocles, and we have to figure out what to do with it. Your question about what is to be done, I think it's a good question. This year's NDAA had the Senate version. I mean, was it the reconciliation? There with some defense bills have appropriated a couple $1 billion for some of this sort of critical minerals onshoring, but one of the big issues remains permitting. We have a lot of critical minerals that we need in the continental United States. We have those deposits. However, because of our permitting process, it takes way too long and way too for American companies to be able to reliably set up those sort of mining facilities. There's just way too much permitting and procedural barriers and litigation costs that just increases the time and increases the startup capital necessary to build up these mines. So there has been a growing coalition, bipartisan coalition in Congress to have permitting reform so that we can start opening up those mines much more faster.
Thank you. I think that was very informative and sort of also a reality check. I'm not sure a lot of people know how vulnerable the United States are in this field. Considering the multilateral angle, the US, EU, and Japan just launched a critical minerals club to unclog non-Chinese refining capacity by 2030. Are the volume targets realistic, or will price volatility and permitting timelines doom this effort?
I mean, I think there's still not that much information out about what this implementation is going to look like. So, I think we have to be optimistic because I think we have to figure this out. Like, there's really not a choice in this matter. That said, I do think a lot of it'll be very hard to restore a lot of these permitting or these sort of processing and refining capabilities because these are a couple issues. But one, I already talked to the permitting stuff. The other is some of these capabilities refining capabilities are very highly technical capabilities that the United States is divested from, and China has really upped its game and refined over the last couple of decades. So, just even if we threw $1 billion, a lot of money at this problem and had all the permitting sorted out, the United States does not have the intellectual property and the technical capabilities necessary to just like really fix this stuff, right? Just start having extraction happen. Don't have the technical capabilities for that. The other problem is a lot of this sort of critical minerals extraction is it's environmentally polluting, right? And China doesn't really have to care about the environment as much as we do with a lot of our environmental regulation, which are justified in certain aspects, but that also means that of course, like pooling the resources together with our allies and partners is always a good instinct, but there's going to be coordination costs working with allies and partners. I think I think it's good to have, but ultimately I think the solution just is not necessarily found just through international partners. We just have to fix the things in our country. I think that's my perspective.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. Looking ahead to how we measure progress, by 2030, what metrics or early warning indicators should policymakers watch to know whether U.S. techno-industrial strategy is succeeding right now?
That's a good question. I think, assessing one of the big threshold question, and people within the tech space, and you guys are in California, so you're probably familiar with this. Who's going to get to AGI first, right? And some of the most accelerationist technologists say we will get there within the next few years, definitely by 2030. I'm not. That's pretty often. Some people say 2035, 2040. I'm not really sure, but I think we if by 2030 we are in a contingency where China gets to AGI first, and of course what counts as AGI and stuff like that is going to be up for debate, and might be hard for us to verify that the Chinese had actually received it if they do. But if the Chinese actually get there before we do, an AGI that's also capable of iterating on its own and self improvement, that would probably mean at some point we lost the technology race, and that would be very concerning. That's I think just other metrics. I think just the number of raw compute China has, both through smuggled chips that are under export controls plus domestic manufacturing. I think, and then that's the metric to see. Like, will Huawei be able to substitute the imports of NVIDIA chips with Ascend chips? Huawei right now they are expected to produce at 200 or 250,000 chips domestically. That seems like a big number, but it's actually like barely enough to fit one data center, right? So I mean, good for them, but actually not good for them. But yeah, it's not a good thing for them. Like they that is not way too little to fit the demand for of the Chinese AI sector. Like it is estimated, and this is just one estimation, according to Rand, 3 million smuggled TSMC chips made it into China. So, and were used in AI data centers. So 250,000 is not enough. So, but if they started getting the millions and tens of millions by 2030, I think that's a huge problem.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think really surprising and really insightful. To end the techno-industrial policies section of this talk, China ended its rare earth and magnet export ban on June 26th of this year, after just 1 month, showing that it can shut off supplies whenever it wants. If Beijing blocks exports again, what leverage will the United States still have, and which stockpiling, piling, or ally sourcing plans will work the best?
Like, what leverage do we have against the Chinese, or?
Oh yeah, pretty much, yeah. What leverage
Well,
we have against the
I
Chinese?
mean, so the Chinese cut the critical minerals card because the Trump administration imposed very high tariffs, right, and serious export controls on high end chips and other competitive actions that basically kind of forced them into kind of box them in it was kind of an act of desperation that China decided to cut this critical mineral card, and it proved to be very effective. I think the existing reality is that a lot of the U.S. government has lifted some of or suspended some of the competitive actions against China as part of an understanding that China is going to lift its ban on these sort of critical minerals. If the Chinese renege on its deal, then that understanding no longer stands, and I think the approach would be for the United States to resume a lot of its competitive action, which might mean it'll be a couple of things, right? It could mean greater military assistance to Taiwan. It could also mean greater export controls, hiking up of tariffs. It could also mean another attempt to ban Chinese nationals from studying in American universities. This one especially hurts because a lot of Chinese Communist Party elites like to send their kids to American universities. So I think we just get back on track and start doing competitive actions if they renege on the deal.
Thank you. I think that section was really great. Moving from the techno-industrial side to the Indo-Pacific side of things, how would you assess the current balance of power in the Indo-Pacific, and which indicators most clearly show whether the United States is pulling ahead of China or falling behind?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of ways to measure the U.S.-China military balance, right? And people give you different answers, but I think one thing that keeps me up at night right now a lot is the lack of U.S. logistics and U.S. transportation capabilities. So look, if in a quote unquote fair fight where the Chinese military and the American military meet in a flat field with all of their joint forces pointed at each other, and then we say go, our military will win, right? But that's not how it's going to go out. Like the PLA can concentrate all of its military capabilities on the seizure of Taiwan or exert power projection within its very immediate neighborhood, like South China Sea, East China Sea, and its entire joint force, could be deployed for that objective. The entire U.S. joint force needs to travel from all around the world to get to Taiwan, right? 85% of our combat forces of our combat capabilities are in continental United States, and we're going to have to like move that into theater, Indo-Pacom, and into the Taiwan Strait to be able to fight the Chinese. And we do not have the lift and shipping capabilities to rapidly redeploy our entire joint force to fight the Chinese in sufficient numbers with enough scale. What we do have is only the capability to kind of ship small numbers of the joint forces in a piecemeal fashion. But piecemeal fashion is very bad because if you don't have enough if you don't have enough scale, if you don't have enough mass going in at once, the Chinese are just gonna, piecemeal fashion destroy the joint force as each one of them arrives in theater, right? It's an easy problem for them to solve. So you do need to be able to move things into theater very quickly, like within the first week. We don't have that capability. So I know there's a lot of conversations about we need more warships. We do need more warships. Probably need more drones and etc. But just sheer lift capabilities, I think that keeps me up at night.
Great. Thank you for that overview of the U.S. military capabilities versus the Chinese. Tying into your answer, the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea are both potential conflict zones. How can the United States discourage aggression while still avoiding an automatic slide into escalation if a crisis does erupt?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the point, right? Of a lot of our um, I mean, we've deterred China from taking Taiwan on three separate occasions. There have been three separate Taiwan Strait crises, and since 1949, and each single time we sailed a major U.S. fleet through the Taiwan Strait when the Chinese were made some aggressive actions against Taiwan to send a message that like the American deterrence holds here, and that was sufficient to cause the Chinese to kind of back down. Um, which really makes you think that like ultimately this comes down to just capabilities, right? If the Americans can demonstrate that they have the sufficient amount of military power and capabilities that could be deployed quickly into theater or is already deployed in theater to meet the Chinese advance, then China won't invade, as they haven't invaded for the last 80 some years, right? Um, it's 70 years, I guess. And it's all about kind of maintaining that deterrence. Is require just having the right capabilities on the right side of the Taiwan Strait.
Thank you. That was a valuable perspective. Uh, how effective are the multilateral agreements like AUKUS or Quad in containing Chinese maneuvers in the Indo-Pacific and against Taiwan, I guess, as well?
Um, well, so like AUKUS and Quad, they're both interesting, right? I mean, they kind of a bit different, right? Uh, so Quad is not a military alliance, right? So we're not like it's not a situation where like and it's not it has a maritime aspect to it and economic cooperation aspect to it, but it's not something to be it's not really an explicitly military charge, right? Of course, with Quad comes greater coordination and partnership, which might lead to military cooperation, deepen military cooperation between U.S. and India or India, Australia, Japan. But that's really not the objective, right? Um, so in the event of a Taiwan contingency or something like that, um, I don't necessarily think there would be like I think we could count on diplomatic and economic support perhaps from Quad, but it's not a military uh, you know project. AUKUS is different, right? AUKUS is pretty explicitly about Pillar 1 is about submarines. Pillar 2 is about emerging tech in the defense space. Like these are both like very hardcore, hard defense, hard powered, defense capabilities, and developing those with our allies and partners, with the UK and Australia and the United Kingdom. I think that could make a difference. But of course, really the problem is we don't know if the Australians are going to actually join us in a fight. They might, um, but we don't know. And then the other aspect is, especially on the submarine side, we're barely making enough submarines to supply our joint force, the American military, right? Which is going to be the one that will definitely be fighting if we're going to be fighting at all, right? So there's a lot of questions about like it's on the American defense industrial base side, like whether we can actually sustain AUKUS. What's supposed to be a force multiplier in the short term is going to require the United States to transfer some of its subfleet to the Australians. Um, so in the short term, we're going to take a risk. We're going to diminish in our capabilities. So A, is that risk worth it? And B, is there a way to mitigate that risk by increasing our submarine production? I think we're trying to do it, and then hopefully we succeed.
I think my last aspect of this, or last question of this talk, would be looking towards 2035. What single development, either political or technological or military basis, do you think could most decisively alter the strategic landscape of the Indo-Pacific?
Um, mm, well, I would say one thing by 2035. So Xi Jinping is 72 right now. 2035, that's 10 years from now, right? He'll be 82, right? It's kind of getting up there, right? So the, one can, I mean, I think 2035, you never know with these sort of things. There could be a succession, right? And of course, a different Chinese leader uh, would cause that would probably be cause a lot of succession will consume a lot of energy within China. Um, so that will be a political development that could like really be a wild card, and I have no idea what that would look like, and whether the successor that comes after Xi Jinping, who that might be, because Xi Jinping has very pointedly, disempowered most people around him. So it's very unclear who the successor would be, right? But that lack of clarity might actually exacerbate the succession crisis because there's no clear heir apparent that everyone can just support. Um, but that's a bit of a wild card. It's kind of counting on someone's demise. So like and the Chinese will probably like make sure they get all the best medicine to keep Xi Jinping alive, as they should. Um, but in terms of something more predictable, um, I think I would say, hmm, I would say whether where Japan's going to end up, right? um, Whether Japan is slowly, incrementally loosening restrictions on its military, on its self-defense force. They don't call it a military, so that it could engage in military action. Whether they'll be able to really fully reform themselves, so that they'll be able to directly in an integrated way fight with Americans in the defense of Taiwan. If they could, that would be great. I'm not counting on that happening, but that will be a major political development. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your time. I think your insights are very valuable, and our fellows have definitely learned a lot of new things. I think I'm going to open the floor to our fellows right now to ask questions. If you want to ask questions, please just introduce yourself. If you can, turn your camera on. And yeah, thank you again for taking your time.
Yeah. Any
Hi.
questions?
Oh, yeah. Hi. So I apologize. I can't turn my camera on right now. But I'm Zeli. I'm from Arizona. I'm a junior. So, and first off, thank you so much for coming. That was really interesting to hear from you on your perspective. Um, so I'm interested in like you talk a lot about conflict in Taiwan and in general conflict with China as kind of something that's impending, right? As something we need to be prepared for militarily as well as strategically.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, how you see, do you see conflict as something that inevitable? Do you think deterrence is effective and can prevent conflict in Taiwan over the long term, or do you think maybe we could even cooperate?
Well,
And
I think the answer to that is we need to prepare for the worst and hope for the best, right? The there's I would much prefer a scenario in which the United States military has sufficient deterrence that China doesn't even think about invading Taiwan and just maintain the status quo. But for the America to be formidable enough of a military force, then it requires us to be serious about our military planning, so that and act like we are ready to fight a war, right? And to take the appropriate precautions, right? Because that exercise will lead to deterrence, right? Like we need to prepare for war to prevent war, right? We need the sufficient military capabilities on the right side of the Taiwan Strait so that China won't think twice about invading. Um, and if we don't do that, then they will, right? It's kind of and they have demonstrated on three separate occasions they're willing to take military action against Taiwan to attempt to seize it. So I think the math is pretty clear there.
all right, thank you.
Just going off of that a bit, I'm kind of curious if you think that China sees Taiwan as more important to them in terms of their national security, or they see it more as important to them for their own regime legitimacy. And do you think that distinction would matter for U.S. policymakers?
Yeah, I think they clearly have signaled that this is like a regime legitimacy question, right? This is, of course, from a national security perspective, it's nice to have the TSMC fabs. It's nice to have Taiwan so that you can easily project out of the first island chain. Like these are all true, but ultimately, this is the Chinese government and Chinese Communist Party has made very clear that this is part of their plan for the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Right? This is um, a reversing a century of humiliation by recovering all of China's core territories. It's a deeply ideological objective, similar to, I think, Crimea and Ukraine for the Russians. Um, and I think, I think the interesting thing is, despite it being a very ideological objective, again, cooler heads have prevailed within China when the United States demonstrated on three separate occasions that like we have the military capabilities to wreck you if you try something. So it's deeply ideological, but they're also practical, and they can always kind of they can also maintain a degree of regime legitimacy by saying like this is going to be an eventual objective rather than like something you have to like finish right now. What's concerning is Xi Jinping has publicly signaled that the Taiwan question is a question to be solved in his generation, right? Which signals a desire not to kick the cane down the road, and like we have to actually get this thing done. And if they feel that degree of desperation, then I think that's a problem. Anyone else?
I'll go again.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
do you think so? There's obviously been a lot of attempts by America to strategically decouple from China. But do you think that in the long term, like, could that cause more harm than good? So I guess like more specifically, like how far do you think techno-isolationism can go before the US starts harming itself and its own, technical capabilities?
So I mean, this is the so in terms of like we'll cut ourselves up from the innovation in the rest of the world. I understand that argument. I think there's a couple of different manifestations of techno isolationism, right? I think one of them is like um, so there's one understanding that I personally don't agree with, which is like, we need to stay engaged technologically with China and continue to give them the high-end chips so that they could, because it's important to get them, make sure they remain hooked on American technology so that they don't develop a domestic option that allows them to achieve full autarky. I'm a bit more skeptical on this because I do think like chips are that we do need a degree of controls on these on high-end chips, and I think everyone agrees a degree of control is necessary. Of course, the question is to what extent, right? And I think that really is a difficult question, right? Of uh, these tech companies, Nvidia, right? We need them to be able to continue to make money, so they can continue to reinvest into R&D, so they can continue to develop cutting edge chips. But at the same time, we need to make sure they're making, in doing so, not excessively fueling the Chinese technological edge, right? A lot of this probably comes in like pretty technical details, right? So there's some chips that are relatively more, mass-produced chips above 7 nanometers that are readily produced, and actually the Chinese are quite dominant in the, the relatively everyday use chip sector, right? Like the ones you see in your fridge are probably made in China, right? Um, those chips, I don't think is a problem. Not as severe of a problem if China has it. Um, but yeah, it's a good question. Like, what is actually? I want to put this question to you. What is techno isolationism to you? Like, what does that term exactly mean?
That is a good point. Um, I mean, I suppose it would be just drawing away from existing partners and focusing more domestically on both technological development and the export of those technological goods that are produced domestically.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I think that's a good definition. Focused on allies and partners. I think that really is the big question, right? Of like, what is I think everyone kind of agrees in DC, or even just in Hong Kong would agree that some level of export control on China is necessary, and our adversary is necessary. We disagree on the extent and what specific capabilities, but like we philosophically agree. But I think the question of allies and partners is that's where there's a lot of division. Um, right now, for example, so what was one thing that was very controversial that the Biden administration did at the very end of its tenure was the global diffusion rule, which was, they was basically put the entire world, all the countries in the world, into one of three tiers. Tier one had the greatest access to American chips, uninhibited. Tier two, more restricted. Tier three, basically, you don't get anything, right? And this pissed off a lot of our allies and partners because many of our allies and partners were put into tiers that they didn't expect. Like the Poles were pissed, right? Even though they're actually a great U.S. ally, that they were they were not in tier one. I forgot whether tier three or tier two, but they were significantly they were like, what's wrong? We're a great American ally. Why are we not getting this? So and the reality is, if we don't provide it, China's going to step in and start providing those capabilities instead. So we do need to remain engaged, and we do need to remain engaged and provide those sort of capabilities to our allies and partners, so that they will continue to use American capabilities. And there's kind of a lock-in effect, right? When you start using American stacks, it's a lot easier to continue to use American stacks and like switch away to a Chinese stack. So it's important to get those market shares now. Um, that said, of course, like we need to make sure that these allies and partners that we give these chips to are not acting as pass-throughs for those sort of chips to end up in China, or end up running data centers that are connected via cloud to like Chinese networks, and the Chinese can train on data centers located in a third country. That's a really bad situation. So we do need to have tough conversations with allies and partners of like, we can keep on giving you chips, but you need to like take certain actions to cordon yourself off from China. I think one attempt at that was the UAE deal, that President Trump, in his first trip after coming into office, visited the Gulfies in the Middle East and signed a bunch of AI deals. One of them was just like this sort of stuff, right? We are signed a bilateral, I don't know if it was a fishery treaty, but bilateral memorandum with the Emiratis and said like, look, we'll provide you these sort of chips, and you're going to lock in and lock into American vendors and take necessary precautions to ensure China doesn't get access to that. I think that's one way forward. I think there's people who's also concerned about whether the Emiratis will fully keep up their end of the bargain and not really truly cordon off the Chinese. But I am sympathetic to the argument that like techno-isolationism, as understood as like not working at all with our allies and partners, does not work. Like we do need to provide these America needs to be a technological leader that provides these capabilities to countries that are allied to us and are partners of us. But we need to make sure they're not actually, China's not taking advantage of that. And it's a balance. I wish I had a better answer for you.
No, I think that was really thorough. Yeah. I hadn't even considered the whole like third-party data center thing, like using another country's data center to train the web. They're like,
that's a big problem, actually.
So yeah, that's really informative. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is like my question's I guess, hi, I'm Brona. My question's I guess somewhat on the partnerships, but maybe a little bit like at a different angle. When it comes to like, private sector involvement, like the private sector's role within like tensions between the China and the US, do you think that they can almost like the private sector and maybe take NVIDIA for example, can almost act as somewhat of like a stabilizing like force or like or role, have like a stabilizing role because of the shared interest between both the US and China in like NVIDIA's pursuits?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? Like I think like NVIDIA could envision itself as that, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of concern that they're kind of getting taken for suckers by the Chinese Communist Party, right? This has kind of been like a pretty typical story of China, where China says, oh, we have good intentions and we just want win-win partnerships, but it ends up being an extractive relationship where China kind of ends up getting a lot more of the gains, and then I mean, you're seeing it with Tesla, right? Where Tesla went into the Chinese market to try to expand, and when companies like that try to expand their market share in China, they're required to have joint ventures with Chinese counterparts and transfer some of their technologies to Chinese local partners. And then at that end of the day, the Chinese start. Now Tesla's kind of getting boxed out by their Chinese electronic vehicle competitors. So you just see situations like that of the China cycle, right? I think there's a lot of lack of trust between the United States and China, right? In terms of something like like ultimately those chips are going to go towards supporting China's technological development, right? Like China's not making that a secret. And if China gets, it's going to be more destabilizing to the relationship if China reaches parity or even exceeds U.S. Artificial intelligence capabilities, and therefore feels more emboldened in terms of technical military capabilities to attempt a seizure of Taiwan. So, in the short to medium term, sure, there could be some stabilization, but at the same time, like it's fueling the long-term plan of China's technological advances and eclipsing the United States, which would lead to a destabilized military balance.
Thank you.
I guess if anyone doesn't have any questions, we could end here. Does anyone have questions?
I guess I'll go with just like a slightly more like kind of unrelated to
Mhm.
More of like a personal thing. How do you think that studying history at Cornell, which is what I noticed that you did,
Yeah.
how did that help you decide on like this kind of career path and looking at international relations and these kind of things?
Yeah. I mean, so part of it was I just started. I mean, it was my history. I think I just really liked like politics and history and countries. So I think Cornell didn't have a IR major, so this was kind of the closest I could cobble together. Like Gov and history was like basically like taking like foreign policy courses, and that was me cobbling together an IR major. Um, I would actually say what was really what pushed me into this is that's my career course load, and I was a student. I was a student reporter at the Cornell Daily Sun, and I wrote about how Cornell took took the most amount of money from Huawei of all U.S. universities. And I wrote a big story about it, and it's just a student newspaper, but it blew up, and Senator Rubio retweeted it, and everything and it was this pretty big moment for me. It's like I just did like a junior in college, um, and I realized, okay, this is pretty big. I want to clearly there's demand signal for these sort of stories, and I want to kind of contribute to expanding the knowledge and pursuing the American policy objectives in this space, because clearly people cared about it. And that was, I think, kind of a pretty big aha moment for me. So, yeah, but history, um, hmm, I don't know. I wouldn't over-index my courses. Actually, I was a Hill staffer, as you know, Athan pointed out. I worked for Senator Ernst. Um, there was one course I failed in college. Um, it was my senior year of college, and I was slacking off, and I just did not turn in the final paper, and then that was an automatic F. Um, and that course was Congressional Policy and Procedures. So, courses are important, but like, I don't know. It's more just about like what the people you meet and like the extracurriculars you pursue. I think those actually have a lot more growth opportunities sometimes.
Yeah, that's insightful. I think I would agree.
Yeah. Especially if you're going to go into policy though, and if you want to come into like DC, I think like your college crew there'll be a lot of like keep close to your college crew, because DC, you're going to meet a lot of people, but not all of them are your friends. Some of them might pretend to be your friends, right? But really, like the people you can really count on are your mates from before you came to DC. So make good friends in college.
I think with that we'll end. Thank you so much for your time. I think all your points about all the topics we've talked about today have been very insightful for all our fellows.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Thanks so much for making this happen, Athan, and Athan and Kayvon and etc. Like, look, you guys have my email. Feel free if you guys ever want to, whether it be talk about China policy or just in general get career advice of how to what if you want to break into the DC policy scene, what you should be what you should be doing and stuff like that. I'm always available. Just feel free, Athans, feel free to share my email. And I'm always happy to jump on a call or get coffee.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining, guys, and stay tuned for the next one, I guess.